Welcome to In the Reads, the podcast of San Jose State University's Read Magazine, California's oldest literary journal.
Hello, my name is Noelle Gibbs, and I am the Senior Nonfiction Desk Editor for Read Magazine, issue 158. Today, I am here to talk with Beth Kephart, who is a writing teacher and author of over 40 books across genres, including memoir, craft, children's books, and now a genre-expanding novel. Today, we mostly talk about that newest book called Tomorrow Will Bring Sunday's News, A Philadelphia Story. This is Beth's debut adult novel, but it also relies heavily on history, both her family's history and cultural history. The story primarily follows her grandmother, Peggy, and crosses over 3 timelines. The first is 1969, when Beth's grandmother is dying of cancer and Beth herself is only a young child, 9 years old. The second is 1917 and 1918, when Peggy would have been a young woman coming of age in Philadelphia. And the third is present day, when Beth, as the adult author, looks back at her family's experiences and reflects on legacy and what it means to be a member of her family, particularly in the context of Philadelphia and the surrounding areas. We had such a great conversation. We talked about so much, from writing across 3 timelines to writing in a genre that's history and memoiristic while also being heavily fictionalized. We talked about the joys of publishing with a small press, what it's like to interact with your family now as a writer while you're also thinking about family from the past, and the joy that Beth has found in her Substack called The Hush and the Howl. In addition to writing, Beth is also an artist, and she's working on a collage project in conjunction with this book. She works a lot with paper and yarn, and so she's been making these collages, each one representing a different month in the 1917-1918 timeline. So we talk about her art. And then at the end, there's this really beautiful moment where Beth shares a movie, a collection of research images from her project, and she narrates the experiences she has as she sees the images that are also in the book that are described. Now, I do want to give you some context for our interview. We had a little Zoom hiccup, and the first 5 or so minutes of our interview weren't captured. So we are launching in right in the middle. We're talking about history and what happens when we discover an error recorded in history. So in this case, Beth found that her grandmother's obituary was misprinted in the newspaper. Peggy's last name was Finley with a Y, but the newspaper printed it as Finlex with an X. So when Beth revisits this history and revises it in her novel, she gives a lot of space for us, the reader, to take in her grandmother's actual name. She writes Finley, Finley, white space. Finley, white space. Finley, white space. So when we jump into this conversation, we're going to be talking about that change in name and history and how we might think about history anew through a project such as Beth's. Thank you again for joining us for In the Reads, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with the amazing, generous, talented Beth Kephart. Yeah, the section where you discover that your grandmother's name is misspelled, and then we see Finley 3 times, and that's the first clue, right? And then it gets deeper a couple chapters later. There's no one to do that for everybody. There's no one to go and write in everyone's history, but I wonder how much a book like this helps us correct other histories as well, just in our knowing that there have been mistakes, that there have been,
Sure.
Well, there are the technical mistakes. The obituary misspelled my grandmother's name, which felt like such an offense to me because she was a larger than life character in my own life. And yet no one could even, all she got, possibly the only time that her name was put down in any official way other than her, when they signed for the house and her birth certificate, but that was her obituary. So there's that sort of thing that's sort of offensive. It's an absolute fact that they got it wrong. But also, I take a huge risk with this book in imagining that my grandmother loved someone before she met my actual grandfather. And my reason for that was that I always was a bit angry with my grandfather for my grandmother had suffered with stomach cancer for many, many years. Probably she had it the whole time I knew her. She did not go to doctors. She never sought help for it. So she suffered hugely. And you always had the sense that my grandfather, who had so much life, was raring to go.
Yeah.
Got to go foxtrot, got to go out in the world. And my 9-year-old, 8-year-old, 7-year-old self saw my grandfather impatient with my grandmother who could no longer sort of keep up. And I guess this book in some way was, well, maybe she had someone else that she loved. And maybe she's been holding on to that secret and to those memories all along. However, I hope the book does make clear that they did take care of each other. There are moments in the book where you see them, my actual grandfather and grandmother, going through their past, looking back at their children, my mother's wedding, and saying, we did okay here, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important not just to, as I said, there are the recorded and documented facts, they should be correct. There are the things that we want to believe and we write toward our imagination versus fact. But in a book like this, even though it is a novel, I make it very clear to the reader, I am just imagining this. I think that we owe that to our readers too, where we are diverting from the known facts, the documented facts. We need to say that. Definitely need to say that when we're writing memoir. I felt I needed to say that in this hybrid sort of book.
And there's a chapter, and I think I have it quoted in my notes, that you call fiction parentheses non, right?
Yeah.
It's a conversation with you and your son.
Yeah.
Let me find it because it's so beautifully done. Okay, so the author says, I mean, it's almost all true and it's almost all fiction. He'll say, your son, but which one is it? And then you, the author, says, yes, she'll say, that's what it is. And that's the whole conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not asking you to box your work. I know this is billed as a novel, but you're also a memoirist and you've written a lot about writing truth. So this navigation between fiction and nonfiction in this work is exactly what you were just talking to us about.
Yeah.
But you gave yourself permission to imagine your grandmother to go fully into that fictional story while also having facts, while also having you, Beth, who you are now. And then also imagining the girl of you, the 9-year-old, and how your grandmother saw you. So there's a lot of questions wrapped up in there. I think one, how do you imagine your character, you as a character? How do you put yourself as a character in the book then and now? And then walking that line as a fiction and nonfiction writer, marrying the two in this work.
Wow. Well, I look at photographs of the young Beth. There aren't many of me. I'm the middle child, so most of the photographs are my brother or my sister. I look at the very few photographs there are with me and my grandmother. I see the love between us. There might be 4 photographs of us together. And everything I thought might have been true about the love we had is borne out in those photographs. It is not hard for me to write the 9-year-old version of Beth because I remember her so clearly. It is not hard to write the current Beth because I am, as you said, a memoirist, and I have been working on truth-telling, truth-making for a very long time, and I've taught it for a very long time. So I think that of all of the writing in the book, those were the places where I could really know that I was right on the page. I don't think I ever redrafted any of the pages that have the true version of me in them. And I will also say, though, that as much liberty as I took building this somewhat unique form, I don't want to call it a hybrid because it's not, no, it's part that it's just this fluid form of a book. It was also super scary because there's so much detail about Philadelphia itself. And I had the great honor of working, I hope we can talk about it a little bit, but with this small press, Jesse Williams Burns is the daughter of C.K. Williams, the great poet, who weirdly I had met years ago when I was interviewing him for a magazine story. We didn't know that when we first started to work together. And it's Jessie's mother, who is her whole life has been a copy editor, who sat with this book of mine and went through it. I don't know, I'm going to put it at a dozen times, and I don't think that's an exaggeration, checking every spelling of every knitting mill, for example, one small example. And, you know, when you're taking facts from old newspapers, the old newspapers often got it wrong. And here's Jessie's mom poring over whether it was rocks, you know, whatever, with an apostrophe or, you know, and so I was terrified of getting my city wrong, while at the same time knowing that I had to give myself freedom to make things up that happened in the city, to let these two, when Peggy is 16 and there's this boy that she loves, to let them find each other along a riverbank, even though there were pollutants in the riverbank, but not so many right there where they were. Am I going to talk about that? It was smelly there. Not, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
You know, at one point you have to give yourself some freedom. So I think my biggest problem was, as a writer, where do I give myself freedom with the city facts? And, you know, I'm allowed to imagine her at that time period, but I did never, ever strayed from who I was or who I am now. None of that is in any way fictionalized.
And as a reader, I think it was clear to me where we were in an imagined truth and when we were in your real experience. Just because of how you've moved us through these time periods, and also it feels so authentic when we're hearing from Beth at both ages.
Yeah.
But we also get, I love the section where your grandmother is thinking about who you'll be and that you'll be confusing your senses. And I wonder if that's how you see yourself, or if that's how you I mean, obviously it's how you imagine her seeing you. But if you remember anything from those photographs or from that relationship that would have put those words in her.
Yes, that's very much who I was, who I became. And I think that because she was quiet, just like my mother's brother, my very beloved Uncle Danny, who Harry is my, you know, the character Harry is very much like my Uncle Danny. We, the, I know that, well, if you ask the question again one more time, because I was just thinking, I got a flash. I'm sorry, I just did that. I got a flash of my Uncle Dan and I got very sad and I lost the question. So
Do you want to stay there for a minute?
I was just thinking about my uncle and this character, Harry, and what actually happened to Harry in real life and what actually happened to my uncle in real life. And I suddenly got this collision of great sadness. So ask the question again.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
When you were imagining how your grandmother experienced Beth as a 9-year-old, about things like confusing your senses, about how you were tethered to the world, that's perhaps how you imagine yourself. Is it also, what made you feel like, oh, maybe my grandmother saw me this way too?
That's what I was saying. Because she watched me. Because I have, as is clear in the book, a very brilliant older brother, 2 years, and we're very close, older than me. And then I have a younger sister. And I felt myself to be invisible a lot of the time. And I knew that my grandmother and that my uncle saw me. And if they saw me, they saw that little girl whose senses were blurring, who would, you know, one of my favorite things to do when I was a kid, a little older, you know, than in that time frame, was to watercolor paper and then to write crazy poems on the paper. Like I was always blurring color and language. I was always blurring speed. You know, I was a runner and I was a skater. And this kind of wild desire to pierce nature, if I run fast enough, can I get into the sky? You know, if I grab all the flowers in the garden? Will I become a rose? Like that kind of kid.
Yeah.
And I think that if anybody's watching you, one time at Thanksgiving when my mother and father were still alive, they had someone come to the house. It was 20, 30 years ago. And this woman started to tell a story about me as a little girl. And I was so shocked because from my parents, I never heard one story about me as a little girl. Never. And the story was very simple. Beth was the one who would always be singing in the back of the car. And I just remember this, like somebody has just revealed me to myself.
Yeah.
So my grandmother saw who I was and my uncle saw who I was. And I apologize for smashing my uncle. My uncle's ornaments that arrived in the box with the letter are just to my left. So when I turned, I saw the whole thing.
So it's all so real.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
How have your siblings or your other family responded? Have they read the manuscript? Not yet.
I don't know that. Well, I have not. My sister, I don't think my sister's ever read any of my books or anything that I've written. I don't know that my brother's read this.
Mm.
He knows it exists. I've sent it to him, but if he has read it, I don't know. The person who read my books was my father.
Mm.
And my husband read my third book, which was a memoir about El Salvador, about being married to a Salvadoran who is my husband's a Salvadoran. And so he read that to make sure the facts were right. So really, it's sort of been interesting because I'm not a part of a writing group. And I will read pages out loud to my son, but mostly I'm sort of on my own.
Mm. I was reading on your Substack, though, that your husband and your son helped you
Yes.
get this really cool billboard, it looks like, outside of a newspaper stand.
Yes.
Invested.
To say that they haven't read it is not to say that they don't care.
Yeah.
Especially my husband and my son. And it is true that my husband had this crazy idea to, at first, let's make a billboard. And then my son, who's in that business of finding the right places for ads, said, no, it's a newspaper story. Let's look at newspaper stands. That was one of the happiest things ever for me because we are a very close family. My husband and son will work on things together, and my son and I will, and my husband and I will, and all triangle. But we've never worked on anything, all of us at the same time. And I don't care if no one sees that. I don't care if it sells one single book. The joy, the pure joy of working on that, because honestly, they both do really love me, and I deeply love both of them. And my husband's a visual artist, and Jeremy's in the advertising world, and I'm not the type of person who will insist you have to read my book. I would never do that to anyone.
Yeah.
I've never insisted. And I believe that the books are here and that when I'm gone, there'll be Jeremy. Maybe if he misses me one day, we'll pick up a book and say, oh, he'll still get to know me through the books.
Yeah.
And I think that's a cool thing to look forward to in a way.
Yeah. Ooh, I have also only one child, and I think, she's only 7 right now, but I do think that's part of why I write. And I'm an only child too. So I think this is my dad. So I think it's still like, how do we preserve our history? We wrote about this a little bit in our email exchange, but I really loved moving our perspectives. When you write about Peggy, it's in the third person. We get Beth in the I. Sometimes you address the boy in second person. And I imagine that also came organically, like you were speaking about some of your other writing, but I'm curious too about how that came to be. And
the boy writes letters to Peggy, and they get to Peggy late, and there's this growing distance between them, just not in terms of love, but because the war is pressing, and now he's at Camp Meade, and now he's getting on a train to Hoboken, and now he's going to be on this boat, and now he's at Brest, and then he's going to go to the final battle. And so his voice, I wanted it to be a calibrated voice, of a voice that, while the love is still deeply there, you can feel him kind of going farther and farther away. And that's how his voice came to me, and how I write about him. I also think that the first person, no, I wrote a memoir and essays called Wife, Daughter, Self, in which the third, second, and first, past and present, all live together. And that can work, especially because it's a memoir in pieces. And, everything there works, I think. But I think that when writing third person, you are kind of saying, or I am saying in my own process, I'm just slightly behind this person. I'm just slightly behind. They are here, and I'm just slightly over here, looking over their shoulder. In the I am here. I am the core. I am moving, and everything I see, And I think we choose our pronouns, or I choose my pronouns, to be a subtle indicator to the reader about how much I, the writer, know, and how much I am, close to knowing, but not perfectly knowing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Peggy Carey's literature, we got to see, we'll see in the video, right? Our little pocketbooks. Do you know if your grandmother read Joyce and Emerson?
I do not. I don't think that she probably did. I would love to know what she read. But what I know is that my grandmother was really smart, and I wanted to indicate that to the reader. But I have my Emerson book right over there on the top of that pile, these are little library books. The Whitman it's a candy company based in Philadelphia, had been there for a while, moved to Fourth and Race, and in 1917 they began to create these souvenir boxes of chocolates where they would slip these books in. They were printed in New Jersey. They were like 4 inches by 2 or something. And they would be put into the boxes of chocolates that family could send to the soldiers abroad. So they'd get literature and chocolate. I just think it had to be in the book. Whitman's was a Philadelphia chocolate company. These little libraries were cheap, right? If you're poor, you can still get something in it. And of course, the Lonnie, who lives across the street, a completely fabricated character, lives across the street from Peggy. She works in the novel at Whitman's, so it makes sense that these would be around. The Joyce is coming from, I did some research on what was being most read at the time, and that portrait had just come out, and I felt that Peggy has this strong relationship with her teachers at school, that they would have seen in Peggy this intelligence and would have placed that book in her hand, because it's not a book that most people would easily understand, but I felt that Peggy would. And I also wanted it to be clear that Peggy reads and understands James Joyce, but maybe the boy doesn't quite understand what's going on with James Joyce, but he loves hearing Peggy read it. And isn't that a beautiful gesture of love? I don't really know what you're talking about, but I love hearing you talk about it. And I wanted that. He comes from a family that is selling fruits and vegetables at the Reading Terminal Market. He has pulled himself up from the bootstraps. He's gotten a scholarship to go to this textile school. He's obsessed with worsted wool. He is constantly reciting facts about the numbers of mills and how worsted wool. And so he has his obsession, which Peggy shares with him. And then when he cannot live his dream of becoming someone at Fleischer in the worsted wool, she goes and she takes that job at Fleischer, and a different job than he would have had. But she lives inside that building, both to I mean, she does her work inside the building, both to help her family and to give her own self a sense of, responsible living. And also, this is your dream, and I'm going to dream it for you till you get home.
And that's the hope I think that gives her
Yeah.
the ability to go on. I do feel like him being so interested in textiles and obsessed with the literature, able to quote it, and then her being able to pull out the Joyce and the Emerson. Maybe they're not intellectual peers, but they have that dream of the future. Do you think this book
Yeah.
is so much about a dream of a future, and perhaps your grandmother's dream for you for the future, and perhaps your dream moving on? So the balance there just felt so on point, and how they love each other for the things that they love, even though they're not.
Exactly.
Yeah,
They're not trying to change each other. He's not saying, "Will you stop reading Emerson? Will you stop reading Joyce?" And she's not saying, "Enough of worsted wool already."
right.
They're like, "I love
That's
you."
what draws her to him in part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You work with your hands a lot in your process, right? You have you have a book about, I was reading, I haven't read it, but My Life in Paper, where you're exploring how physical paper, right?
Yeah.
And then for this project, you were creating art alongside of it. And I do think part of our goal as writers is to embody life and embody the text. So could you talk a little bit about the relationship between creating with your hands and writing and this process in particular?
I think that for this book, especially, so I began working with my paper in August 2020 when my father passed away. I had taken care, he was not living with me, but I had been there with him through everything since my mother passed away, the year-long process of packing up their house and then moving him to different parts of a facility as he needed more care. And then COVID, of course. And the last thing I was able to do for my father was throw him a birthday party at the place where he lived. My brother, sister, everybody came. And that was February. They closed down that facility a week later, and he died in August. The degree of loss for him was huge. Very soon, he went from not being able to understand how to use a telephone, just the isolation was terrible. And then he passed away in August. As I mentioned, my dad was the one who would read my books. He was an engineer, and he loved for me to give him a research project. So, for example, a book that I wrote for young adults, I needed to know how a fire would spread in the top of a barn at a particular time of the year, etc. How quickly it would go, what would spark it, what would put it out. And my dad just loved that. And he, give me a project kind of thing. And so I shared my books with him. And when I had readings pre-COVID, he would always come and I would always have a cake because my dad loved cake, but there was never a reason for him to have one. And so all of my friends would know my dad would stand at the back of the library or whatever, eating the cake while everything else was going on. He was just so happy to have like 3 slices of cake. And when he died, it was a very tragic, sudden death. It was a very haunting thing. I was fortunate that they allowed me in the final moments of his sudden death. I just didn't want to write anymore. One of the things about my dad is that he cared a lot. He was super humble, but he cared a lot about funerals and how many people came to funerals. He thought that that was a symbol of how loved you were. And when he was unwell, even before COVID, I would go to the funerals of his friends for him. And the first thing I would come back all dressed up and talk to him. And how many people, how many people? Well, of course, we couldn't have a funeral for my dad. So it was just my family on the side of a hill. And so I wanted to make booklets for people so that they could write their memories of my father and keep them for themselves and not knowing anything because my husband is a verified incredible artist. In fact, it's his painting that's on the cover of this book. I just ordered a jelly plate and some acrylics and a brayer and some paper and needle and thread. And I just taught myself how to make these little booklets. And then I just grew. And then every Christmas or birthday, the gift would be something unexpected. It would be a marbling kit, or it would be cyanotype chemicals or it most recently was a sewing machine, which made me furious because I said, what am I going to do with the sewing machine? Where are we going to put it? But that sewing machine's made all the difference. So I started working with my hands, and I'm not someone who can draw. But what I really love is the art of collage. And I love bringing unexpected materials together. And the work that I do, it's diverse. I'll be making a book. Here's one that I just made for a friend. So this is different cyanotype panels. And then inside are these pockets where I am, where she's going on a book tour. So for her to tuck in little bits of memory and to write about it. So, and then inside is jelly art that,
Yeah.
So I'm making books like that. I make, behind me are, I'm starting to think about these as quilts. So I do a lot of prints and then I tear them. And then this one I called Room with a View because it's got all these different elements that are bound by thread and by this copper patina that goes across the different plates. But I also have been doing collages with very thin mulberry and hanji paper, which I print first or I cyanotype first, and I tear into small pieces or larger pieces, and I try to create this multi-layered feeling. And so for this book, for every month that's in 1918, I sort of said to myself, what is the feeling of that month? And then began to create these pieces that speak. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this easily, so I will try. I don't think so. No, I was going
Layer
to
them
try
on
to.
after too.
Yeah. So now I have to turn this off. Yeah, don't know how to do that, but I do have a few that I can share, and I know I've sent you some. But if there is one, for example, called December, which I'm looking at right now, where there are these leaves that have been veiled behind hanji paper. And there are 3 of them. And it's sort of this idea of my grandmother, the boy she loved, and then me up in the corner, sort of carrying forth now. So these were important for me to do after the book was done because they made it tangible for me. So again, my art begins with the making of prints. And then, so what does each print want to be? In this case, it wanted to be a book. Sometimes they want to be collages. This morning I was working on a collage. I've been sick. You can probably hear it in my voice. And it was just all blur on purpose because it's how my head actually feels right now and why I stuttered there too. I was worried today that I wouldn't even be able to answer any questions. So, but I am able, and it's very calming, to place my mood in some way into paper. And then, I sell books that I make and art that I make, framed art. This one, in fact, has been sold already. So I don't think I would survive the current time we're in without the art. I was so sick since Saturday, and then I just basically made myself get up today that I didn't make any art during that period of time. And something was just way off. And so I thought this morning, I don't care, whatever you make, Beth, it doesn't matter. You have to make the art, and that's what's going to get you back into, being able to converse in the world.
And do you have a plan to somehow share the art you've made for the book with the book?
I would like to, Noelle. There's the possibility of a talk that hasn't been scheduled yet that I would be able to. My dream is to have a talk where I could do a small overview of the book and then have each one of these 12 pieces framed behind me and then to read a paragraph from each month, which would show how the art and the color and the overlay. Sometimes these pieces are really dense and sometimes they're mostly white, and with just little bits of color. And I would love to do something like that. I'd like to make it like a in the round kind of, because I'm just, I go back to the girl with blur. The blur is me. I just don't like hard lines between anything, including between writing and art. I'd really like to make, I'd really like to occupy, I've never even tried to articulate this before, so it might not make sense, but I really would like to articulate the middle space between what is language and what is color and paper. And I try to do that on my Substack, where I write these pieces and then illustrate them with something that I've made. And so I'm always hoping that the reader of my Substack will read the piece and then say to themselves, well, we'll think of the writing as a prompt and the art as inspiration, and will write their own pieces. And I am learning that people are doing that. People have been writing to me saying, I had stopped writing, but because of this piece of yours where you just opened a door for me, or that piece of art took me back to memory. And so I'm trying to, there it is, a digital screen flat, but to make something three-dimensional of the art and the writing and that thing in between.
And to do it on Substack also gives you engagement with the community. I was curious about your experience with Substack because I was just poking around to get ready to talk with you today. And I really love the blending of the visual, and the writing that accompanies it is digestible, right? You can read it in a couple minutes and look at the art. So yeah, I wanted to hear just what that experience has been for you. How long have you been posting it there? And
yeah, I think the Substack
about it.
So, a short version of a long story, I had taken a job in publishing that turned out to be the absolute wrong job. And I left that job and was just not sure what I would do. And I took a drive out to Lancaster out here, and I sat in a cornfield on a bench. And I just decided that I would, and my husband had suggested, why don't you Substack? And I said, no, absolutely not. And then I decided I wanted to do this thing, and I love it so much. It gives me a kind of purpose, because I don't know that I have another book in me. In this period of time, there is so much to take care of and so much to worry and so many friends that I want to uphold. And I don't see myself losing myself in a book-length project for a long time. But I need to write and I need to make art. And there's always been this furious urgency in me. And there is no way to quell it. I've tried. Substack gives me this opportunity to be as absolutely, I can do what I want to do with the language. I can do what I want to do with the art, and also with the pacing of it, right? It's, yes, each piece is each piece, but I'm always thinking as a choreographer, because I skated and I often choreographed my own pieces. I'm often thinking short piece, like what has the reader read in the last 3 times? Well, they've read something densely poetic and personal. Pull back from that. They've read whatever. They need something for them now. Write a piece that is about, their own making. How about something funny? You've been pretty intense lately, and then, oh, wait, you already had a 4-paragraph piece. I try to keep them short. Keep it short, keep it short, keep it short. Now you're allowed to do long. So I think about the overall experience. And in fact, I have often 15 pieces or so that I have in progress. And it's like chess pieces. I decide, they're there, they're in draft form, and what is happening in the world at the time or what has come before it. And then what I love about it too is that I will always, except for the one where I hit my head, I just published that one, but I will always give myself 4 days of review. And this has become like this fun thing. In the morning and at night, when I know a piece is going to go up in 4 days, I spend an hour on in the morning. So I will have spent 8 additional hours before it goes live. I love that. I love it because sometimes I don't know what the last line needs to be until the 7th time I've gone there. And it's such a fun puzzle and a surprise. So for me, I don't think I've ever been as alive as with this Substack. That doesn't mean that I have a huge number of followers or anything, but it is important to me personally. And I think that if I can stay whole, I am a person that people tend to call or text when feeling incredibly worried about the world. I do read a lot. I'm always looking for hopeful signs. I'm involved in a lot of things, and I'm constantly helping my friends. Well, but look at this. Well, but think about this. Well, but when you do that 3 or 4 times a day, and you yourself are sort of a little frantic, but trying not to show it, you do need to have something that makes you feel fully human. And the Substack has done that for me.
To that point, I think this was on the post about working on the newsstand with your husband and your son. And I wrote it down because it resonated with me about doing this for other people. You said, I I think about how much joy this funny project had brought at a time when I wasn't otherwise feeling so jolly, which is a point I wish to reiterate. Our lives are still our lives. It is imperative still to have some fun, to laugh out loud, to dream big, even as we attend to the business before us.
Okay, so there, in all of the posts that I do, one of the things that I always taught in memoir is the value of the universal. And it's really important to me to not, um, if I am dwelling on something with poetic density and urgency, I hope that I'm going to such a place that it immediately releases the same in the reader and isn't just me saying, and in that case, with that piece about, the poster and the joy, I I could have left it with I haven't felt so jolly at a time I haven't felt so jolly. But if you have a few readers, you do have an obligation to free them too, to give them that same chance at joy at a hard time. And I will also say, this is so important. There's so much doom and so much gloom, and it just feeds off of itself. And you're sort of banging around with it. And I'm looking for the person, the Substack, the fact. I'm looking for someone who's still able to smile because they must know something. They must know something that can keep us whole still or somehow bind us still or, and so I am not, I know too much about what's going on in the world, perhaps, but I am not going to give up hope. And I am not going to be the person on my Substack who is frightening people because we are all still human. This thing with when I hit my head, I would have never written about hitting my head because that's just whining about hitting your head. But what fascinated me about that experience where I hit my head, I'm going to this event and blood is everywhere. It was a very expensive little thing with the ambulance and all that. But I would have never written about that. That's just, oh, this happened to me. But what I took away from that day was how kind everybody was. And that is the message, without labels, without knowing on what side of what divide anybody stands. At the core, there's people who are going to help you, and your job in that moment as the person being helped is to appreciate that they did. I mean, when I came home from that day, the first thing I did was I called the CVS into which I had walked because I was full of blood and I got the manager on the phone and I said, I want you to know what these 2 young people did for me today in the CVS, and I had thanked them in person, of course, but I want you to thank them for me. I want you to know what they did, because that's what we owe the people who have been kind to us, is to acknowledge it. And that's what that piece was about. Just like I would have never just written, oh, my husband and son made a poster for me, if I weren't trying to make the point that it was fun, you're allowed to have it too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I have another one from your book that talks about cancer. And I feel like we're seeing in Read this year, we saw so many submissions across genres dealing with cancer.
Wow.
It's in the zeitgeist right now. It's something that we're all having to face. And so when Peggy is at her deathbed, you write, she thinks that when she dies, the cancer will die. The cancer will be nothing without her, useless, homeless, no teeth. And I just love that taking back of power, right? In a moment where her physical body is so helpless, but she's still mentally with us and she can see a way that she wins this thing.
Yeah.
And it's resonated with me, having lost some people to cancer, having some people struggling with it right now. And it's similar to what you were just saying with your Substack of this, you could just let this little story be a thing, or you can take it and look for the hope or the joy or the power in it.
Yeah, I'm sorry about what you're going through. And I have to say that the lines that you just quoted were a psychological triumph for me, because not the way they're written, but that I was able to see, oh yeah, right. Cancer didn't win. Cancer's nothing without her. Cancer needed her. And then I was like, I could kind of take it back a little bit. And I was grateful that the thought had occurred so that I could give it to her.
Yeah. I think that the resonance of that line with the rest of the piece altogether, with honoring the boy, the fictional boy, but there were those boys, with honoring, there's a necklace that we haven't talked about. I don't want to give it away, but with honoring the loss of heritage or heirlooms or whatever. I think there was this similar, the cancer is just a thing. Somebody died, but Peggy is still very much alive in your memory in this work.
I've wondered whether the book would be considered too sad. But of course it takes place she's 16 in 1918, but she certainly wouldn't still be alive today. Well, she could, no, she couldn't be, according to some Social Security scams. And so of course she wouldn't be here any longer. I am hoping that the beauty of their love for each other will be transcendent. And so that love will feel like a beautiful thing and not a broken thing at the end. When my grandmother died, and it's in the book, my father put the three of us on a bench and he told us, that she was dead. And it was mischief night. And I just remember going outside and the sun was setting and I'm like, well, there she is. And I have always felt, looking up, well, there she is. Very distinctly. It's never left me. And so when at the end there is this sky, I'll just say, without taking away anything for somebody who wants to read it, that's what I've carried with me my whole life. The idea that you would be gesturing up towards the sky, and giving something back to the sky. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
So that was not a random ending. That's the ending that would have, I didn't know where it was going ever, but I knew when I got to that page what it needed to be, because it was with all of the heart that I've always brought to my love for her.
Thank you for putting it there.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk a little bit more about working with the press? You mentioned.
Oh, sure. Tersalo.
Yeah.
I've had a strange career, Noelle, and that's why I never think anybody sort of knows I'm around, but I have made my own way. I have close to 40 books or something in all different genres. And my first was, a National Book Award finalist and sort of scary to me because people wanted to turn it into film, into Broadway, and I said no to everything. I did not want to be on TV. I did not want any of that. And because I turned down so many opportunities, I was pretty early on branded as someone who wasn't going to ride any commercial wave, right? But I still had books that I wanted to write. And, as I've said, writing is so essential to me. And so I've made my way. I've worked with the big houses and the small houses, and my husband and I make our own books together on memoir. And for this book, I just wanted it to have the right home. And I had seen Tursalo on Instagram. I don't know how I got so lucky to see this. And Jessie, who is the editor publisher, is an Edith Wharton scholar, and she does a lot with Edith Wharton's books. And she has Harvey Finkel. He's a photographer, sort of famous Philadelphia photographer, that she's published a lot of his books. So it's an unusual mix, but it's what Jessie wants to publish. And I wrote to her on Instagram, but since I don't even really know how Instagram works, wasn't sure she got the message. Then I wrote again, and she said, send me the book. And like 3 days later, I get this absolutely gorgeous email from her, long, where she really understood the book. And I was sort of shocked. And at the same time, I was talking to another publisher, knew I was working on the book and had expressed some interest in it. And Jessie said, come down and meet me. And so it was then that I thought I should research who is Jessie, and found out that she was C.K. Williams' daughter. And I went down and met her, and she lives in Philadelphia, and we just could have talked forever. And I left, and I'm like, there's no way I'm not doing this book with Jessie. And we have become like sisters. I feel like she is a sister. And she's worked really hard she and her mom, to overcome any of my typos or errors. And she has innovative ideas. And neither of us are here to make it some commercial huge thing, got to get it here, got to get. It's not like that. We want the right people to find the book. And I think we have the same sort of goals for it. The primary goal was to make a beautiful book. She allowed Bill to. Bill had actually painted her, and she looks a lot like my mother and my grandmother. And there was I had made the art for the cover, as I did for My Life in Paper. But then I just one day remembered this painting of Bill's, and I said, Bill, that painting looks like my mother and my grandmother. And he said, okay. And he started to play with the cover, and Jessie was like, yes. And then Bill designed the rest of the cover.
Wow.
And, another publishing house might not have allowed you to do that, but, what the fonts were, everything, she just kept saying, we want it to be the book you want it to be. So, and then when I first met her, I'd written two things about C.K. Williams. One was this sort of impression of him for a magazine after spending a day in his house in Princeton. And one was a review of one of his award-winning collections of poetry. And I'd sent both to Jessie, and she never read them. And then about 3 months or 4 months ago, I said, Jessie, because she loved him so deeply, and he's no longer here, and she thought it would make her so sad to read about him. And then finally I said, Jessie, you need to read those pieces. And she did. And I think they brought him back to life for her. He was saying some things to me in there that I'm not sure he'd ever said to her, about what his dreams were for his work, etc. So in the way that this book brings my grandmother, I have also brought her a little piece of her dad back. And so we've both sort of had this experience with people we love being brought back through words. And I think that binds us too.
Yeah, that sounds such like an ideal partnership
Yeah.
and friendship.
I think that I love to write and I hate to publish.
Hmm.
And I think that writers are so uniformly, or maybe not, so many of the writers that I know are just disappointed. just disappointed. They didn't get the agent they wanted, the contract they wanted, the PR they wanted, the sales they wanted. They didn't get. And for me, that's always been nerve-wracking because I think it's a privilege to do what we do. Would we be writing unless we felt compelled to write? I don't imagine. So it's genetic or something. We have to write. We feel the need to write. Okay, so does the world owe us anything because we feel that need? I don't think so. So I've worked in all genres. The first few were memoir, then I wrote the Memoir of the River, then I wrote young adult novels that were mostly read by adults, and then I wrote picture books that are highly poetic and deeply historically researched. But this is my first novel or type of hybrid kind of whatever it is for adults. And it is the only kind of book I ever wanted to write. So it feels like it's, it feels like a period at the end of the sentence for me.
Do you want to show the video so we can?
Let's see if I can do that again. I was so proud that I did it the first time. Let me see. Here we go. We're going to see if it works. I'm going to bring it back. So this video has some images in it that help the book, and that's my grandmother in pieces, the earliest photograph I have of her. And here she is, my favorite photograph, in her expressive house with my Uncle Danny sitting on her radio. My absolutely gorgeous mother on her wedding day. Those steps were the steps I'd climb to see my grandmother. The man she married and who was a life insurance man and took care of her. What you can't see in this photograph is that my uncle is in the mirror taking their picture. These are the little library books that I've bought throughout the years. This is Willow Grove Park, where something happy happens in a remembered moment in 1917. This is the Reading Terminal Market, 12th and Market at Philadelphia, where some of the story takes place. It's still there. This is a green sweater that I dressed my grandmother in throughout much of the book, except those hot summer months. This is trolley car on Washington Avenue. This is my greatest research find, the catalog for the Philadelphia Textile School, that the boy goes to the school in my story and he studies. And I could read all about worsted wool here and what he would have been studying. This is a picture of that from outside. It's also where Peggy sits when the parade goes by. The knitting is huge in this book because women were knitting the underwear, the gloves for the men at war. Samuel Fleischer, one of the two brothers who created this magnificent facility where young women and men were given the chance to learn music and to dance and play softball. He wanted them to be full and whole human beings at Fleischer Yarn. This is where I imagined my grandmother worked. She was a doffer. She's a doffer in the book, which is taking these yarn bobbins off and replacing them with empty ones. That's Annie Taylor. She's in the book. This is Scoop. She's in the book. She really was there when my grandmother would have been there. This is Pearl Dunlop, also worked at Fleischer. She's in the story. This is Camp Meade, built by 15,000 men in 3 months in 1917. As suddenly Wilson said, we're going to war. This is the men at Camp Meade. This is where I imagined my boy sleeping at night, reading his worsted wool book and thinking of Peggy, and the Leviathan, which took these men to war. This is Broad Street, Philadelphia, the Liberty Loan Parade on September 28th. 200,000 people. This is my family. I'm sitting on my grandmother's lap. There's my beautiful uncle, my sister, my brother, and then the shoes of us.
It strikes me in watching that a second time through and hearing you talk about your collage process, just how much of a collage the book itself is,
Yes.
and how you've been able to collage both your personal family history and the history you learned about in your research. And it just weaves together so seamlessly on the page. So much information that we get in these beautiful sections of prose that just lift off and are pleasurable to read and easy to read, but also so rich and so deep.
I so appreciate that. As I said, my family doesn't read my books, and I don't have I have many friends in writing, but we don't exchange work. And when I got your note, I think I'd heard, other than Jessie and her mom, and one friend who read it after it was done, I think maybe the book list review had come out, but your words were just so meaningful to me, Noelle, because I don't know what there's no focus group that has looked at this book. There's no marketing team that has said, but this, but that. So your words really meant a lot to me. I really appreciate them.
Thank you for sharing it. I felt so special getting a manuscript that's unpublished just in my inbox.
Oh, well, we couldn't do this any other way.
No. Is there anything else you wanted a chance to share? I feel like I could talk to you about it all day, but I
Oh, yeah, no,
pick
I'm
up my
trying
daughter
to think.
eventually.
I think that as many memoir pieces that I've written, and although the true pages, all of the stuff about Halloween and my brother, that's all completely true. It feels like although those pieces are few and far between in this book, it does feel almost like this is the most true book that I've written. I've often said that about my river book, Flow. Not that I change any of the facts. I'm a real truth, proponent in memoir. But in Flow, when I could imagine the river as a middle-aged woman endlessly going over her own life, I have so much regret about my life. It felt like so true. And this book feels so true to me in that same way, because maybe you have to give yourself some room to mix memory and imagination to get to the deepest felt truth within you. It would have been impossible to actually write this as memoir. Of course, it would have been, imagine this as memoir. Well, when I researched this, I've discovered this. Oh, well, she must have been this. I imagine her as this. No, this form allows me to completely get away with all the asides that make room for the imagined in memoir. But it also, in writing it, was just, I knew that I was occupying the most true space that I could occupy, which made it so hard to get those knitting mills exactly right. Because I'm like, yeah, Roxbury knitting mill, okay, and that's why Jessie's mom was, I don't know any copy editor in any Simon and Schuster, Norton, or Houghton Mifflin would have done what Jessie's mom did for this book.
That's amazing.
Yes, it is. How do you know that you're loved? When somebody goes and looks up every stinking knitting mill in Philadelphia, make sure the apostrophe is in the right place. I mean,
Yeah.
no matter what. I mean, there's Alice Paul is in this book, a suffragist, because the women's rights movement is here. And I had incorrectly said that she went to Columbia School of Philosophy when it was the Columbia School of something else, or vice versa. Jessie's mom looked up every single thing. I mean, Jessie would text, Mom, just look this up. And she said, I'm like, oh my God, what would I do without her mother? Or Jessie. But I'm just saying, copy editors matter a lot,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it sounds like copy editor and personal fact checker.
Yes.
Both and yeah.
Yes. But it also makes me think I will never do another book like this.
Yeah.
So anyway, you have been so delightful. I'm sorry that I had that mind gap. My eye went over there and I'll show you what I was looking at in that moment. Yeah. I hang these in my book room. So when the letter when the box arrived with this letter from my Aunt Miriam, these also arrived. These were the what my uncle would make. He would sell them at Neiman Marcus and elsewhere, and they had been set aside, like 4 each, one for me, one for 4 for brother, sister, me, and so they're here, and they're here all the time. Hanging on this wall are also 3 Fleischer yarn posters, and and things that my writer friends have made for me or given me or drawn for me. So this room is a place where when I forget that I'm loved, I come in here and I'm like, there's the mittens from Natalie Cush, there's the art from Will Dowd, there's my uncle, there's my grandmother. And then behind me is something that Jessica gave me. So, it's just maybe I make art so I could stand in this room and remember that I'm loved too.
Yeah.
So always have a room where, where you place the things that remind you that you're loved. That's my closing bit of advice.
Beautiful bit of advice. Great.
Award-winning author Beth Kephart has published more than 40 books of fiction and nonfiction, including Cloudhopper and The Great Upending. Among her many honors, Kephart was a National Book Award Finalist, winner of the Pew Fellowships in the Arts Grant, a National Endowment for the Arts Grant, and the Speakeasy Poetry Prize. Her books have been named to Best of Year lists and translated into more than 15 languages. Kephart has interviewed some of the most important writers of our time on live stages and written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, Literary Hub, Creative Nonfiction, Brevity, and many others. Beth has conducted writing workshops across the country, won the 2015 Beltran Award for Innovative Teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, and was 2013 Miami YoungArts Master Teacher. You can find more about Beth's books and links to her essays at bethkephartbooks.com, BethKephartBooks.com. Read about Beth Kephart's writing workshops at junctureworkshops.com, JUNCTURE workshops.com. Thanks to author Beth Kephart for joining us. This has been In the Reads, the podcast of San Jose State University's Read Magazine, California's oldest literary journal. Find us online at readmag.org. Thanks for listening.